The Widowed Duke's Bride, a love story that will make you cry. Historical stories. Welcome, dear listeners, to a journey through time and the human soul. Prepare your hearts for a story that traverses the silent halls of a 19th century Spanish palace, where a woman forgotten by the world discovered that true love is not found in the places destined for us, but in the spaces we conquer with dignity. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching me from right now? Leave your city in the comments. I want to get to know each of you who will embark on this journey with me. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel and leave your like, so that more stories like this can reach you. Every gesture of yours helps me continue narrating these memories that time has almost erased. Year 1832. City, Manzanares, New Castile, Kingdom of Spain. In that time of Carlist wars and broken promises, when Spain bled from disputes over the crown and palaces, kept secrets within their stone walls, a woman invisible to the world's eyes was about to discover that being forgotten can be, paradoxically, the first freedom. The spring of 1832 arrived in Manzanares like a whispered promise. The almond trees blossomed in the orchards of the Valverde house, and the air carried that sweet, melancholic scent of things born only to die beautifully. It was April, and the world seemed ready for celebrations. Inés Valverde was 21 years old and had an existence made of silences. All her life she had inhabited the less lit corners of the house, the corridors where no one passed, the forgotten gardens where wild roses grew without witnesses, not because she was unwanted, but because she had been born after Lucia, and Lucia was the sun around which everything gravitated. Her older sister possessed that beauty that seemed sculpted to be admired in salons, hair as black as a moonless night, almond-shaped eyes that promised mysteries, a laugh that sounded like crystal music. Inés, on the other hand, had brown hair that the wind easily disheveled, eyes that observed more than they seduced, hands that knew how to embroider, play the piano and paint watercolors that no one saw. For years, Inés accepted her role as a shadow. She accompanied her mother, Doña Elvira Valverde, to Sunday masses. She took care of the floral arrangements. She read French novels that no one else touched. She painted the sunset over the fields of Castile without ever showing her canvases. She lived as flowers live in walled gardens, beautifully, but without an audience. Lucia's marriage to the Duke of Santillana had been arranged for 6 months, an agreement between families, as was customary. Rafael de Santillana was a widower, a war veteran, and needed a wife who would bring refinement to his palace and a mother for his orphaned daughter. Lucia represented the perfect alliance. The date was set April 22nd. 3 days before the ceremony, in a still dark dawn, Inés awoke with a premonition. It was the kind of silence that precedes storms, when even the birds fall silent. She went downstairs barefoot, the cold wooden planks beneath her feet, and found Doña Elvira in the main hall, holding a piece of paper with trembling hands. Lucia's letter was brief, just 3 words written in a hurried script: "I cannot. Forgive me." Inés felt the world tilt, like a poorly hung painting about to fall. Her mother did not cry. Women like Doña Elvira Valverde did not cry. They restructured strategies. "You will go in her place." The words fell on Inés like heavy snow. "Mother, There is no time for hesitation. This family's honor is at stake." The Duke of Santillana was informed this morning. He has accepted the substitution. Inés looked at her mother. In Doña Elvira's eyes there was no affection, but there was no cruelty either. There was only the cold determination of someone who had learned that social survival demands sacrifices. For the next 2 days, Inés was measured, fitted, instructed. Lucia's wedding dress had to be taken in at the waist, the sleeves lengthened. The initials LV, embroidered in gold thread on the bodice, remained. No one had time to undo them. On the eve of the wedding, Inés went up to the room that had been her sister's. She sat before the Venetian mirror and observed her reflection. She did not recognize herself. The woman staring back seemed like an unfinished portrait, a sketch awaiting definition. That night, Inés did not sleep. She stood at the window, watching the stars over Manzanares, and for the first time in her life she allowed herself to ask a question. Who will I be when I can no longer be invisible? The answer would come, but not that night. The dawn brought carriages, white flowers, and the distant sound of bells announcing a loveless wedding. The chapel of San Miguel in the Palace of Santillana was an austere construction, all grey stone and blue-stained glass windows that filtered the morning light in melancholic hues. There were flowers, white lilies, carnations, sprigs of rosemary, but they seemed to decorate a funeral, not a celebration. Inés entered alone. Her father had passed away years before, and Doña Elvira had refused to accompany her. "A substitution does not deserve pomp," she had said, though Inez knew the real reason was shame. Shame for Lucia, shame for the situation, perhaps even shame for her. The dress was heavy, meters of ivory silk embroidered with microscopic pearls, long sleeves, a rigid bodice that made it hard to breathe. With each step, Inez felt Lucia's initials press against her skin, as if her absent sister still claimed that place. At the altar, Rafael de Santillana waited. Inez had seen him only once, 6 months prior, when he visited the Valverde house to formalize the engagement with Lucia. She remembered a tall man, broad-shouldered, with dark brown hair and an expression that seemed perpetually distant. Now seeing him closer, she noticed other details. The scar that cut across the left side of his face from temple to jaw, a testament to some forgotten battle. The grey-blue eyes, the color of the sea before a storm. The large calloused hands that held a gold wedding band as one might hold a burden. He did not smile when she approached. He just watched her, and Inez felt pierced by that gaze, not with desire nor with contempt, but with something worse, calculated indifference. Father Sebastian began the ceremony. His voice echoed off the stone walls, reciting Latin that sounded like a sentence. Inez responded mechanically to the vows. "Do you take this man? Yes, as eaten to love and to honor. Yes, and in sickness and in health. Yes, all lies but necessary lies." When Raphael placed the ring on her finger, Inez noticed how his hands trembled slightly. Not with emotion, she realized, but with restraint, as if every gesture were a task to be completed, an administrative obligation. There was no kiss. Father Sebastian declared them husband and wife, and Raphael merely bowed his head slightly, a formal greeting one would give a stranger at a diplomatic reception. The ceremony was over in less than 20 minutes. Inez was led through the palace corridors by a middle-aged woman with a severe face and hands that held a bunch of keys as if they were weapons. "Sor Dolores," the woman introduced herself with no warmth in her voice. "I am the housekeeper. Your quarters are in the north wing." The north wing. Inez noted the significance. Far from the main apartments, far from the Duke. The room was large but cold, with dark wood furniture, heavy burgundy velvet curtains, and a four-poster bed that looked as if it had never been used. There was an oratory in the corner, a dresser with a mirror, and a window that overlooked the inner gardens that, Inez realized, were abandoned. The rose bushes grew wild, untrimmed. The fountains were dry. It was a sad beauty of forgotten things. "The Duke dines at 8 o'clock, Sor Dolores informed her, already leaving. "Punctuality is expected." When the door closed, Inez sat on the edge of the bed, still in her wedding dress. Her hands found the embroidered initials on the bodice. Elsby, Lucia Valverde. Her name was written there, permanent as a scar, reminding her that she occupied a space not meant for her. Slowly, Inez began to take off the dress. Each button she unfastened seemed to free not just her body, but something deeper. When she was finally left in her linen nightgown, she looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was no longer the invisible daughter of the Valverdes. She was the Duchess of Santillana, and although she knew that title had been gained by chance, by another's abandonment, there was a spark of something new in her eyes. It wasn't courage yet, but perhaps it was the beginning of it. That night, when Inez went down for dinner, Raphael barely touched his food and did not say a word, but his grey eyes studied her from the corner of his eye, as if trying to decipher a puzzle he had not asked to solve. The first weeks at the Palace of Santillana passed like overcast days, when it doesn't rain but the sun doesn't shine either. Inez learned the household routine. Breakfast at 7, silent. Raphael would leave to handle affairs with the estate steward. She would remain. Sor Dolores taught her the duties of a duchess, which correspondence to answer, which invitations to accept, how to supervise the servants without seeming authoritarian or weak. It was a delicate balance, and Inez realized she was being constantly tested, but there were also discoveries. On the third morning, while exploring the palace corridors, Inez found the library. It was a large room with floor-to-ceiling shelves, smelling of old paper and dust illuminated by sunbeams, and there, resting by the window, was a piano, a jacaranda grand harpsichord with ivory keys, yellowed by time. Inez approached it as one would a wild animal. She touched a key. The sound echoed, clean and melancholic. She sat on the padded bench, placed her hands on the keyboard and began to play. Not a classical composition, but melodies she invented that were born from her fingers like little prayers. That was how Beatrice found her. The girl was 7 years old with light brown hair in braids, eyes too serious for her age, and a grey cat in her arms. Inez hadn't heard her enter. When she finally noticed her presence, She stopped playing abruptly. "I'm sorry, my mother used to play," Beatrice said, her voice low but firm. Her fingers sank into the fur of the cat, which was purring. Before she went to heaven, Inez felt her chest tighten. Anna Maria, the first Duchess, the mother Beatrice had lost, the wife Raphael had mourned, the ghost that inhabited that palace even in her absence. "Would you like to learn?" Inez offered, surprising herself with her own courage. Beatrice hesitated. She looked at the cat as if seeking permission, and then nodded. In the following days, a silent routine was established. Every afternoon after her duties, Inez would go to the library. Beatrice would appear, always with Tristan, the cat, in her arms. They would sit together at the piano. Inez taught simple scales, children's melodies. Beatrice learned with an almost painful concentration, as if each note were a secret message to her dead mother. They didn't talk much, but something was being built in those shared silences, a bridge made of patience and respect. It was also in those weeks that Inez discovered the painting supplies. In a library cabinet stored in wooden boxes were brushes, tubes of oil paint, and blank canvases. They had belonged to Anna Maria, Sor Dolores explained reluctantly. The first Duchess painted landscapes. Inez did not touch the paints. Not yet. It felt like an invasion. But every morning she walked through the abandoned gardens. She observed how the wild rose bushes intertwined with the iron gates, how the dry fountains housed birds' nests, how beauty persisted even without care. She carried a sketchbook and drew with charcoal, quick sketches, visual memories. It was on one of these mornings that Raphael found her. He was walking along the stone path, still dressed in riding clothes. He stopped when he saw her, surprised. Inez, kneeling by a rosebush, was sketching its fallen petals. "You draw?" It wasn't a question, but a statement. "Yes," Inez replied without getting up. She didn't know if she should curtsy, act formally. She opted for honesty. "I've always drawn. It's a way of seeing the world with more attention." Raphael remained silent, observing the drawing on her lap. Inez expected criticism, perhaps indifference, but he said in a strangely soft voice, "Anna Maria used to draw too. She said that things only became real when she captured them on paper." It was the first time he had mentioned his dead wife in front of her. Inez looked up and met his eyes. There was pain there, ancient and deep as roots. "The gardens were more beautiful when she was alive," Raphael continued. "Afterwards, I couldn't maintain them. It felt wrong for them to bloom without her." Inez understood. Grief is not just the absence of someone, but the impossibility of continuing the rituals you did together. "The rose bushes still bloom," she said gently, "just in a different way. Wild does not mean without beauty." Raphael looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slightly and walked away, leaving her alone with her drawings and the certainty that something, imperceptibly, had begun to change. That night, for the first time, Raphael asked her during dinner if Beatrice was progressing on the piano, and Inez realized that he knew that he was watching, that perhaps he was not as indifferent as he seemed. It was Beatrice who told her about the room. They were in the library, as always at the end of the afternoon, and the girl had stopped playing in the middle of a scale. Her small hands rested on the keys, motionless. "Have you seen my mother's room?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the keyboard. Inez hesitated. "No, I didn't know there was. It's in the east wing. Papa locked it after she went away." Beatrice's voice was careful, choosing words as if stepping on broken glass. "Sometimes at night I hear him walking there, but he never goes in." That information settled in Inez like a seed. For days she tried to ignore it, but curiosity, or was it compassion, grew. One afternoon when Raphael had traveled to Toledo on legal matters, Inez found Sor Dolores in the East Wing corridor. "I would like to see the late Duchess's chambers," she said, with a firmness that surprised herself. Sor Dolores stiffened. "The Duke gave express orders." "I am the Duchess now," Inez interrupted, and for the first time it didn't sound like a lie. "Please." The housekeeper studied her for a long moment. Then, with a sigh of surrender, she took a bronze key from the bunch she carried. The door creaked as it opened, as if protesting the intrusion. The room had been untouched since 1829, 3 years prior. Closed curtains trapped the gloom. Furniture covered with white sheets looked like ghosts. There was a smell of stopped time, of unbreathed air. Inez entered slowly. Sor Dolores remained at the door, vigilant. The sheets were removed with care. Inez revealed a mahogany desk, a 4-poster bed of sky-blue silk, a dresser with a mirror. On the desk, yellowed letters. Inez did not read them. It felt too invasive, but she saw, leaning against the wall, a portrait, Anna Maria Santillana. The painting showed a woman of serene beauty, with brown hair loose on her shoulders, dark and gentle eyes, a restrained smile. She wore a moss-green dress and held a sprig of lavender. It was not an imposing beauty like Lucia's, but a beauty that dwelt in her gaze, in the softness of her expression. Inez understood in that moment why Raphael had been unable to forget. Anna Maria was not just a dead wife. She was a presence that had left marks too deep to be erased. "She died in childbirth," said Sor Dolores, breaking the silence. "Beatrice was born, but Anna Maria bled for hours. They called 3 doctors. None could save her. The Duke, he never fully recovered. He locked this room and never spoke her name aloud again." Inez felt tears burn her eyes, not of envy or resentment, but of pure sadness. Sadness for Raphael, for Beatrice, for Anna Maria, who had not seen her daughter grow. It was then that Beatrice appeared at the door, Tristan in her arms. Her eyes widened upon seeing the open room. "Mama Inez," she whispered. It was the first time she had called her that, Mama Inez. Not mother, for that place belonged to another, but a version of her own, a title invented to fit them together. The girl entered and walked to a small dresser. She opened a drawer and took out a carved wooden music box. There was a small golden latch, but when Beatrice tried to open it, nothing happened. It was broken. "Mama always played it before I went to sleep," Beatrice explained, her voice choked. "After she died, it stopped working. Papa said maybe it was heaven's way of saying she wouldn't come back." Inez knelt beside the girl. "May I see?" Beatrice handed her the box. Inez examined the mechanism delicately. Something was stuck, rust or misalignment. "I will try to fix it," Inez promised, "but I need time and care. Precious things cannot be rushed." Beatrice nodded and, in a gesture that pierced Inez's heart, she hugged her. A brief, almost shy but real hug. When Raphael returned from Toledo 2 days later, Inez was waiting for him in the library. She had put the music box back in the drawer, but she had taken something with her. One of Anna Maria's letters. She hadn't read it entirely, just enough to know she needed to speak. "I opened her room," Inez said without preamble. Raphael froze, his jaw tight. "You had no right. Beatrice showed me the music box. She wanted me to try to fix it." Inez approached, her voice firm but gentle. "Raphael, you locked that room as if locking away the pain would make it disappear. But Beatrice needs memories of her, not silences. And you need to forgive yourself for not saving her." Raphael's gray-blue eyes filled with something indecipherable. "Anger, perhaps, or relief." "You don't understand." "No, I don't completely understand. But I know what it's like to be invisible, to be the second choice, to live in the shadow of someone who is no longer here." She took a step forward. "Anna Maria deserves to be remembered, but you and Beatrice deserve to live." Raphael didn't answer. He just turned and left the room, leaving Inez alone with the weight of her own words. But that night, for the first time in 3 years, Raphael did not walk the corridors of the East Wing, and when Inez passed by before going to bed, she saw that the door to Anna Maria's room was ajar, as if someone had finally allowed the night breeze to carry away some of the accumulated sorrow. October arrived with cold winds and grim news. A scarlet fever epidemic was spreading through the villages around Manzanares. Children were dying. Entire families shut themselves in their homes, burning aromatic herbs to ward off contagion. The palace of Santillana, isolated on its hilltop, seemed protected. But diseases respect neither walls nor titles. Beatrice began coughing on a Tuesday. Inez noticed it during the piano lesson. The girl interrupted a scale, brought a hand to her throat and coughed a dry, painful sound. "Are you all right?" Inez asked. "Just a scratch," Beatrice answered. But her eyes shone with a warmth that wasn't yet a fever, but its beginning. The next morning, Beatrice didn't come down for breakfast. Inez went up to the girl's room and found her in bed, her face flushed, her breathing heavy. Tristan was curled up at her feet, still as a sentinel. "Call Dr. Romero," Inez ordered Sor Dolores. "Immediately." The doctor arrived before noon. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and steady hands. He examined Beatrice while Inez held the girl's hand. The diagnosis came with gravity. Scarlet fever. "It's in the early stages, but it will advance quickly. She will need constant care. Cold baths for the fever, light broths and," he hesitated, "preparation for the worst." Inez felt the world tremble. "No, she is strong." "I hope so, Duchess. I will pray for it." When Raphael was informed, his reaction surprised Inez. He entered the room, saw his daughter burning with fever, and recoiled. He literally stepped back, as if the proximity of death were contagious not in the body but in the soul. He began but did not finish. Inez understood. Anna Maria had died slowly, bleeding. He had watched, helpless. Now seeing Beatrice like this was reliving that nightmare. "You don't have to stay," Inez said without judgment. "I will take care of her." Raphael looked at her, and in his gaze was a mixture of gratitude and shame. Then he nodded and left. Inez remained 3 days and 3 nights, 72 hours in which time lost all meaning. Inez did not sleep. She fed Beatrice spoonful by spoonful with broths that Sor Dolores prepared. She changed sweat-soaked sheets. She applied cold compresses to the girl's burning forehead. She prayed, though she didn't know to whom. Beatrice was delirious. She called for her mother. "Mama Anna, I'm scared." Then she called for Inez. "Mama Inez, don't leave." And then, mixing the two, "Mama, stay with me." On the 3rd night, the longest, the fever peaked. Beatrice trembled violently, her skin so hot it burned to the touch. Inez held her, embracing that small, fragile body, and whispered, "You are not leaving. I won't allow it. Your mother wouldn't let it happen. I won't let it." Tristan, the cat, who had not left the foot of the bed, let out a long, sad meow as if he too were praying. At 4 in the morning, the fever broke. Beatrice opened her eyes, still feverish but lucid, and whispered, "You stayed." "I will always stay," Inez promised. The recovery was slow. Beatrice remained weak for weeks, but the illness had receded. Dr. Romero, returning to examine her, smiled for the first time. "It's a miracle, Duchess." Or dedication. Sometimes they are the same thing. Raphael had not entered the room during the crisis, but when Beatrice was finally able to sit up in bed, he appeared. He carried a bouquet of violets, Anna Maria's favorite flowers. He placed them on the bedside table. He touched his daughter's face with reverence. Then he looked at Inez. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. I couldn't. But you. She is my daughter now too," Inez interrupted, and as she said it, she realized it was true. That night, something definitively changed. Raphael waited for her in the hallway when she left Beatrice's room. In the dim candlelight, his eyes were no longer distant. "I married you out of obligation," he said, each word seeming to cost him. "But today I realized that perhaps I received more than I deserved." Inez did not reply. She just held his hand briefly, and that simple gesture contained everything that words could not reach. In the following weeks, Raphael began to dine earlier to be present when Inez visited Beatrice before bed, and one afternoon, Inez found him in the library playing the piano clumsily, but playing, while Beatrice laughed and Tristan watched everything from atop a bookshelf, as if approving of this new order of things. November brought rains and the first grand reception since the wedding. The Palace of Santillana was to host the regional nobility for a celebration in honor of the king's birthday. It was protocol, it was politics, it was the moment Inez would be formally presented as Duchess. Sor Dolores supervised the preparations with military efficiency. Halls were polished until they gleamed. Bohemian crystals were taken out of locked cabinets. An army of cooks invaded the kitchens. And Inez was dressed like a precious doll. The dress was midnight blue, a fabric that seemed to capture the very darkness of the starry sky. Pearl embroideries formed discreet constellations on the bodice and sleeves. The neckline was modest but elegant. Inez's hair was swept into an elaborate coiffure, with small jasmine flowers woven in. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized herself. "You are ready, my lady," said Sor Dolores, and there was something close to approval in her voice. Inez descended the grand staircase. The guests were already beginning to arrive. Carriages with coats of arms, men in tailcoats, women in gowns that looked like flower gardens. Low-toned conversations, calculated laughter, appraising glances. Raphael awaited her at the foot of the stairs. He wore his dress uniform, medals on his chest. When he saw her, something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps admiration. "You look—" he began but didn't finish. He offered her his arm. "Ready?" Inez nodded, though her heart was beating like a war drum. The presentation was formal. Father Sebastian blessed the gathering. Raphael gave a speech on loyalty and tradition. Then he turned to Inez. "I present to you the Duchess of Santillana, Inez Valverde de Santillana, my wife and lady of this palace." Polite applause. Inez curtsied slightly as she had been taught, but in the guests' eyes she saw what they didn't say: curiosity, doubt, judgment. She was the substitute. The second choice. The sister who wasn't supposed to be there. The night progressed with dances, conversations, and wine. Inez moved through the salons with a learned grace, responding courteously, smiling when expected. But she was exhausted from pretending. It was then that the Countess of Alarcon approached. The Countess was 42, her face still beautiful, but marked by the wrinkles of one who had spent a lifetime frowning in disapproval. Her gown was burgundy with gold brocade, heavy and ostentatious. She carried an ivory fan that she wielded like a weapon. "Duchess Inez," said the Countess, her voice sweet but venomous, "what a charming surprise to see you here. We were all expecting your sister, of course, but..." Improvisations sometimes result in acceptable performances. Inez felt the words like slaps. Around them, conversations fell silent. Everyone was listening. Countess, Inez replied, keeping her voice steady. The difference between those born into their places and those who earn them through merit becomes evident with time. Some of us grow to fit our roles, others merely fill them with empty titles. The silence became absolute. The Countess turned pale. Her fan trembled. Raphael, who had been watching from a distance, approached. He stood beside Inez, his hand firm on her back, a public gesture of support. The Countess surely understands that loyalty and character are not inherited but demonstrated, Raphael said, his voice low but clear. My wife has both in abundance. I trust everyone here will recognize that. The Countess curtsied stiffly and walked away. The conversations resumed, but something had changed. Inez was no longer invisible. She had been seen and defended. When the reception ended and the last guests had departed, Inez retired to her chambers. She took off the blue dress, undid her hair, washed her face. She sat by the window, still in her linen nightgown, and looked out at the night. She heard footsteps. Raphael entered without knocking, an intimacy he had not yet taken. "May I?" he asked. Inez nodded. He approached, stood beside the window. There was something he needed to say. "I never apologized," Raphael began, "for putting you in this position, for accepting the substitution, for treating you like an administrative solution." Inez looked at him. There was genuine pain in his face. "You had no choice," she said. "Neither did I, but maybe it wasn't just an obligation. Maybe it was destiny." Raphael smiled, a small but true smile. "You have courage, Inez, more than I do. Tonight, when you faced the Countess, I felt proud of you." They were the most sincere words he had ever said to her. "Would you like to walk in the gardens tomorrow?" he asked hesitantly. "I want to show you a place. Something Anna Maria loved. It was an invitation, a gesture of openness." "Yes," Inez replied. "I would like that very much." When Raphael left, Inez was left alone with the night and the certainty that something delicate yet real was blossoming between them. The next day, Raphael took her to the secret garden beyond the orchard, where there was a stone bench under a century-old almond tree, and there, for the first time, he told her about Anna Maria, not with sadness, but with gratitude for having loved, and Inez listened to every word without jealousy, for she understood that honoring the past was the only way to build the future. Winter arrived in December, with biting winds and frosty mornings that made the gardens look like paintings in shades of grey and white. Inez would wake up early before dawn and sit by the window with a woolen shawl over her shoulders, watching the world slowly awaken. It was on one of these mornings that Sor Dolores brought the letter. "It arrived from Toledo this morning," the housekeeper said, holding out the sealed envelope. "Correspondence from your mother." Inez recognized the impeccable handwriting of Doña Elvira Valverde. She hesitated before opening it. Letters from her mother never brought affection, only practical information, reminders of duty's veiled demands. But this one was different. "Dear Inez, I write to you with news that I cannot ignore, though I wish I could. Your sister, Lucia, has returned. She arrived 3 days ago, without warning, without money, without satisfactory explanations. She appears disheveled and is evasive about her whereabouts these past few months. I refuse to shelter her indefinitely. Her presence here further taints the already compromised reputation of our family. However, as her mother, I cannot simply cast her out. I ask that you speak with the Duke about the possibility of Lucia staying for a time at the Palace of Santillana, under appropriate supervision, of course. She assures me her behavior will be exemplary. I trust in your prudence. Elvira Valverde." Inez read the letter 3 times, each time feeling a different knot tighten in her stomach. Lucia, the sister who had fled, who had let her take her place, who had vanished like mist at dawn. Now she was back, in need of shelter. She should have felt anger. But she felt something more complex, a mixture of pity, curiosity, and an old fear of becoming a shadow again. Raphael needed to know. She found him in the library, reviewing documents with the steward. She waited until they were alone. Then she handed him the letter. He read it in silence, his face unreadable. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully. "What do you want to do?" he asked. The question surprised Inez. He wasn't deciding for her. He was asking, "She is my sister," Inez said, choosing her words. "And she is in trouble, but I'm afraid that her presence here will change what we've begun to build," Raphael completed. Inez nodded. Raphael stood up, approached her. He placed his hands on her shoulders, a gesture that had become common in recent weeks. "You are no longer invisible, Inez. You are no longer the second choice. Not to me, not to Beatrice. If your sister comes, she will be a guest under clear rules." He paused. "But there is something you should know. There are rumors about the Carlist sympathizers. People who associate with them could be in danger." If Lucia was involved, Inez understood. The Carlist war was dividing Spain. To support Don Carlos against Queen Isabella II was considered treason by many. If Lucia had gotten involved with rebels, she could bring trouble, Inez concluded. She could. But if we refuse her, we would also be condemning her. Raphael sighed. "I will send a letter to your mother. Lucia may come, but she will be under discreet supervision. And at the first sign of trouble." "I understand." 3 days later, Lucia arrived. The carriage that brought her was modest, without a coat of arms, pulled by only 2 horses. When Lucia alighted, Inez almost didn't recognize her. The woman of imposing beauty now seemed faded, a simple travel dress, hair tied back without ornament, eyes that no longer shone with that old confidence. She carried only a small suitcase. Sor Dolores received her with protocolary coldness and led her to the designated quarters, not in the main wing, but in one of the guest wings. Inez waited until evening to visit her. She knocked on the door. Lucia opened it. For a moment, the sisters just looked at each other. "Inez," Lucia said, her voice low, "you've changed." "I had to change," Inez replied, entering the room. Lucia sat on the edge of the bed, her hands in her lap. There was something broken in her, something Inez recognized because she had once felt it too. "I should apologize," Lucia began, "for running away, for letting you take my place. But I don't know if I would be sincere." The raw honesty surprised Inez. "Why did you come back?" Lucia smiled bitterly. "Because I had nowhere else to go. Because I discovered that the world beyond the safe walls of our childhood is cruel." She looked at Inez. "You must hate me." "No," Inez said, surprised to find it was true. "I envy you. You had the courage to choose." "I just accepted what was given to me. And look where each of us has ended up." Lucia gestured around the simple room, then looked at Inez in her duchess's dress. "You won. It wasn't a competition, Lucia, but maybe it was. It always had been." When Inez left the room, Raphael was waiting for her in the hallway, and without a word he hugged her. Just that. A hug that said, "You are safe here. Nothing from the past can take this from you." And for the first time since Lucia had returned, Inez allowed herself to believe it. January 1833 arrived with snow, soft flakes that covered the palace roofs and transformed the gardens into landscapes of white silence. Lucia had been living in the guest wing for 3 weeks, keeping to herself, appearing only at meals, answering politely when spoken to, but Beatrice did not like her. A child's intuition is as sharp as a blade. Beatrice, now 8 years old and fully recovered, avoided Lucia. When her aunt, for she was technically her aunt, tried to talk to her, the girl would respond in monosyllables and flee to Inez's side. Even Tristan, the grey cat, would hiss when Lucia approached. "Why doesn't she trust me?" Lucia asked one afternoon, watching Beatrice run through the corridors with the cat in her arms. Inez, who was embroidering by the living room window, did not look up. Children sense things that adults have learned to ignore. Like what? Sincerity. Or the lack of it. Lucia fell silent. Then she sat beside Inez. For the first time she seemed genuinely interested in talking. "Do you really love him?" Lucia asked Raphael. "Do you love him? Or have you just gotten used to him?" Inez stopped embroidering. It was a fair question. "In the beginning it was just survival," she admitted. "Then it became respect. And now? Now it's something I can't name, but it makes me wake up wanting to see him." She looked at her sister. "Why do you ask?" "Because I need to understand how you did it," Lucia said, her voice choked with emotion. "How you turned a prison into a home." Inez realized then that Lucia was not just taking refuge in the palace. She was searching for something. Redemption, perhaps, or just understanding. "Tell me," Inez prompted, putting her embroidery away. "Where have you been? What happened?" Lucia hesitated. But finally the words began to pour out. She spoke of fleeing in the pre-dawn hours before the wedding, of meeting a group of young idealists in Toledo who talked of a Carlist revolution, of restoring traditions, of glory. There was a man, there is always a man in these stories, named Felipe, with fiery eyes and passionate promises. "He said I was his revolutionary muse," Lucia recounted with a sad smile, "that together we would change Spain. I believed him. I followed him to Bilbao, then to Pamplona. Secret meetings, manifestos written by candlelight. It felt important. And then I discovered that men who live for revolutions rarely have time to love real women. Felipe had 3 other muses in different cities. I was just convenient. Lucia wiped away tears that had begun to fall. When the money I had brought with me ran out, he disappeared. He left me in a boarding house in Navarre, without resources, without references. It took me months to get back to Toledo. Inez felt compassion squeeze her chest. Lucia had always been the beloved daughter, the chosen one, the one who had everything, but all of that had crumbled. Why didn't you write to me? Inez asked. Pride, Lucia admitted, and shame. You were living the life that should have been mine. How could I ask for help? We were sisters before we were rivals, Inez said, taking Lucia's hand. We still are. Lucia looked at their joined hands. So similar, yet with such different stories. You became the woman I should have been. Strong, dignified, truly loved. And you can still become who you need to be, Inez replied. But you have to stop running. Mostly from yourself. In the following days, something shifted in the palace's dynamic. Lucia began to attend the piano lessons with Beatrice, just observing. She helped Inez with the embroidery for the charity layette they were preparing for poor families in the region. Slowly, she began to rebuild herself. But the rumors about her Carlist associations persisted. Raphael was summoned to a hearing in Toledo to answer for his decision to shelter a possible rebel sympathizer. The tension grew. It was Beatrice who brought lightness. On a snowy afternoon, the girl insisted that everyone, Raphael, Inez, Lucia, and even Sor Dolores, come to the garden. There she made snowmen, one for each of them. Tristan's was tiny, just a snowball with tree twigs for whiskers. When Lucia laughed, a genuine free laugh, Inez realized that perhaps redemption was not a solitary journey, but something one did in company. That night, as Inez helped Beatrice dry her snow-wet hair, the girl said, Aunt Lucia is sad, but she's not bad, is she, Mama Inez? And that simple question brought a truth Inez needed to hear, that broken people are not enemies. They are just human beings looking for glue to piece themselves back together. February of 1833 brought more than cold. It brought the Council of Nobles of New Castile to the Palace of Santillana. The official summons had arrived a week earlier, sealed with red wax and the royal crest. Raphael had read it aloud during dinner, his voice controlled but tense. His Grace, the Duke of Santillana, is summoned to present himself before the council to answer questions regarding the legitimacy of his marriage and possible compromising political associations. Inez had felt her blood run cold. Lucia had turned pale. Beatrice, who didn't fully understand, just squeezed Tristan's hand against her chest. The hearing was to be held in the palace itself, in the grand reception hall. It was as much a courtesy as a warning. They were being watched. On the morning of the trial, Inez dressed with care. She had chosen a dark grey dress, almost black, modest but elegant. She pinned, her hair in a severe bun. No jewelry, just a small silver cross that had belonged to Anna Maria. Raphael had given it to her the week before, saying that she would have wanted Inez to wear it. The hall had been rearranged. A long oak table at the center, 7 chairs for the council members. Raphael and Inez would sit opposite like defendants. The councillors arrived at noon, middle-aged and older men dressed in black with closed faces, and among them, inevitably, the Countess of Alarcon, who had obtained a special seat as witness and interested party. The interrogation began with formalities. Father Sebastian confirmed that the ceremony had been conducted according to the rites. Sor Dolores testified that Inez fulfilled her duties as Duchess with propriety. But then the Countess stood up. With all due respect to the council, she said, her voice sweet as honey-laced poison, I request an investigation into the legitimacy of this marriage. There were no adequate witnesses from the nobility. The bride was substituted at the last minute. And there are rumors, she paused dramatically, rumors that the marriage was never consummated, that it is nothing more than a political arrangement to cover up other irregularities. Murmurs among the councillors. Inez felt her face burn with humiliation. This was a direct attack not only on the marriage but on her dignity. Furthermore, the Countess continued, the presence of Lucia Valverde, a known Carlist sympathizer in this palace, raises questions about the Duke's loyalties. Raphael stood up, but before he could speak, a sound was heard, running footsteps. The hall doors burst open violently. Beatrice erupted, hair loose, Tristan in her arms, eyes full of tears. No! The girl shouted. You can't do this. Mama Inez can't go away. Sor Dolores tried to hold her back, but Beatrice dodged her, ran to the council's table and stood before the judges, a small figure defying powerful men. She took care of me when I had scarlet fever, Beatrice said, her voice loud, fearless. Papa couldn't, but she stayed. 3 days and 3 nights. She's my mother now, the best mother. And if you take her away, I'll run away too. Tristan meowed loudly as if in agreement. The silence that followed was heavy. The counselors looked at each other. The countess looked as if she had swallowed a lemon. Raphael seized the moment. He stood up, walked to Beatrice, placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Then he turned to the council. "My daughter has said everything that needs to be said," Raphael declared, his voice firm. "But I will add this. Inés Valverde is not a substitute. She is my wife, chosen by destiny, confirmed by love and loyalty. As for the consummation," he paused, looking directly at the countess, "that is not a matter for this council, but I confirm so that there is no doubt that my marriage is legitimate in every respect." Inés felt tears in her eyes but did not let them fall. The eldest councillor, a man with white hair and weary eyes, sighed. "The child has spoken from the heart. The Duke has confirmed the facts. I see no reason to invalidate this marriage. As for the political allegations," he looked at Lucia, who was watching from a corner, "if there is no concrete evidence of treason, only rumors. This council will not involve itself. The decision was announced. The marriage was legitimate. Lucia could remain, but under observation." The countess, defeated, withdrew without a word. When everyone had left, Inés hugged Beatrice tightly. The girl buried her face in her dress, still trembling. "I wasn't going to let them take you," Beatrice whispered. "I know, my love," Inés replied. "They were very brave." Raphael approached, embraced them both. Tristan purred loudly. And there, in that three-way hug with a grey cat as a witness, the family that destiny had improvised was definitively consolidated. That night, after Beatrice had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, Raphael sought out Inés in her chambers, and for the first time, he did not knock on the door or ask permission. He just entered, held her face in his hands, and said, "I married you out of obligation, but I stay by choice, and this choice is the best I have ever made." The night was serene. Stars shone in the winter sky like diamonds, scattered on black velvet. The palace slept, servants in their wings, Beatrice in her room with Tristan at the foot of her bed, Lucia in her quarters. But Inés could not sleep. She was sitting by the window, still dressed in a dark green velvet robe, her hair loose on her shoulders. Raphael's words during the trial echoed in her mind. "My marriage is legitimate in every respect." He had said that to defend her, to protect her honor. But it wasn't true. Not completely. They lived as husband and wife only in official records. They shared respect, a growing affection, even tenderness. But not intimacy. Not yet. The door opened. Raphael entered without knocking, as he had done earlier. But now there was something different in his eyes, a determination, a need. "May I stay?" he asked, his voice low. Inés nodded, her heart racing. Raphael approached. He stood before her, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. Then he knelt, bringing himself to her level. "I need to tell you something," Raphael began. "And I don't know if I have the right words." Inés waited. "When I married you, I was a man dead inside," he continued. "Anna Maria took a part of me with her when she died, the part that knew how to love without fear, without guilt. I married you out of obligation, yes, but I remained silent out of fear. Fear of betraying her memory, fear of loving again and losing." His voice broke. "Fear that you might die too as she died, and I could not bear it." Inés felt tears fall but did not wipe them away. "But then I saw you care for Beatrice during the scarlet fever." Raphael took her hands. "I saw you face the Countess. I saw you receive your sister, the one who replaced you, with compassion instead of rancor. And I realized that you are not just strong. You are who I should have been, someone who does not let fear rule." "Raphael, let me finish," he asked. "I don't love you despite who you were, Inés. I love you for what you've shown me about hope, for what you've taught Beatrice about courage, for what you remind me of every morning when I wake up and know that you are here, that living is not just surviving pain, but having the courage to feel again." Inés held his face in her hands. "I'm scared too," she admitted, "scared of not being enough, that you still see me as the substitute, but I love you, Raphael. I don't know when it started. Maybe when you first defended me. Maybe when I saw you play the piano clumsily, just to make Beatrice smile. Or maybe it was always there from the beginning, growing slowly like deep roots." Raphael smiled, that rare smile that transformed his face. "Then stop sleeping alone," he whispered. "Be my wife for real. Not out of obligation, but out of love." Inés's answer was a kiss. It was delicate at first, exploratory, like two people learning a new language. But then it deepened, laden with months of restraint, of respect that had turned into desire, of friendship that had matured into love. Raphael lifted her into his arms carefully, as if carrying something precious. He took her to the bed. And there, under the light of the stars streaming through the window, they became husband and wife in every sense. It was not just a union of bodies, but of spirits that had finally found permission to surrender. Every touch was a question answered with tenderness, every sigh a promise, every gesture a consecration. When dawn broke, Raphael was still there, his arms around her. Inez opened her eyes and saw his face relaxed in sleep, the scar on his face seeming less severe in the soft morning light. He woke up shortly after, and upon meeting her eyes he smiled. "Good morning, wife," he said, and the words sounded different now, real. "Good morning, husband," Inez replied. They lay there a while longer, just existing together, until they heard small footsteps in the hallway and Beatrice's voice shouting, "Mama Inez, Tristan found a mouse." Raphael laughed. Inez laughed. And in that shared laughter, everything was said. When they went down for breakfast, Beatrice looked at the two of them with that sharp perception of children and asked, "Did Papa sleep here?" And Inez, blushing, just nodded, while Raphael replied, "I did, and I will sleep here every night from now on." And Beatrice clapped her hands, and even Tristan seemed to approve, purring loudly as he rubbed against Inez's legs. March brought the first signs of spring. The almond trees began to bloom, and the gardens, which Inez had been slowly tending, showed signs of rebirth. The rose bushes, still wild but now pruned, promised flowers. Lucia announced her departure on a sunny morning. Inez found her in the library, packing the few belongings she had brought. There was an open letter on the table, the ink still fresh. "You're leaving?" Inez asked. Lucia nodded without looking at her sister. "I received a letter from Aunt Soledad, our mother's distant sister. She lives in Havana, Cuba. She never married, runs a small school for girls. She offered me a place. As a teacher, Cuba is far away. I know." Lucia finally looked at Inez. "But maybe that's what I need. Distance. A place where no one knows who I was. Where I can discover who I can be." Inez sat beside her. "You don't have to run away again." "I'm not running away," Lucia corrected, her voice soft. "I'm leaving. It's different. Running away is running in fear. Leaving is choosing with courage." She took Inez's hand. "You taught me the difference." "I did? You came to this palace as a substitute and transformed yourself into its mistress. Not by birth, but by merit. You showed me that being the second option isn't defeat, it's an opportunity." Lucia smiled, a mixture of sadness and gratitude. "You won, Inez, not because you defeated me, but because you conquered yourself." The two sisters hugged. It was not a hug of complete reconciliation. There were too many scars for that. But it was a hug of acceptance, of respect, of a love that was finding new paths. "When do you leave?" Inez asked. "Tomorrow at dawn. Raphael has already arranged for the carriage." That afternoon, Inez went to her old spinster's room, where she had kept some of her watercolors. She chose one she had painted recently. Beatrice at the piano, Tristan lying on the keys, golden light streaming through the window. She framed it simply. The next morning, as Lucia got into the carriage, Inez handed her the painting. "So you'll remember," Inez said. "That beauty can be born from unexpected places." Lucia held the gift against her chest. "You will be happy, Inez. In fact, you already are." The carriage departed down the dusty road. Inez watched until it disappeared among the blooming almond trees. She did not feel loss. She felt freedom. Raphael appeared at her side, put his arm around her shoulders. "Are you sad?" "No," Inez replied. "I am whole." The following weeks brought a new routine. Raphael spent more time at the palace, traveling less. Dinners became moments of real conversation. Walks through the gardens became a daily habit. Inez taught Beatrice to paint watercolors on sunny afternoons. It was in May that Inez realized something had changed in her body. Morning nausea, tender breasts, a delay that stretched for weeks. She knew the signs. She had observed them in other women, read about them in novels. She called Dr. Romero discreetly. The doctor examined her with quiet professionalism. Then he smiled. "Congratulations, Duchess. You are expecting a child. My calculations point to next January." Inez felt the world spin. Joy, fear, surprise, all at once. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely." Dr. Romero packed away his instruments. "Take good care of yourself. Rest when necessary and," informed the Duke gently. "He still carries trauma from the previous birth." Inez understood. Anna Maria had died in childbirth. Raphael would be afraid. She waited until evening when Beatrice was already asleep. She found Raphael in the library, reading reports about the harvest. "Raphael," she called, her voice soft. He looked up. He must have seen something in her expression, because he immediately set the papers aside. "What is it?" "I am pregnant," Inez said without preamble. The silence that followed seemed eternal. Raphael turned pale. His hands trembled. "Are you sure?" Dr. Romero confirmed it. January. Raphael stood up, staggered slightly. Inez saw the panic in his eyes, the panic of losing again, of reliving the nightmare. She approached him, held his hands. "I am not Anna Maria," she said firmly, "and this is not that birth. I will be fine. We will be fine." Raphael pulled her into a desperate hug, buried his face in her hair. "I can't lose you," he whispered. "Not now. Not when I've finally learned to live again." "You won't," Inez promised. "Trust me, as I trusted you." Slowly, Raphael's trembling subsided. He pulled back, held her face, and for the first time since the news, he smiled. A small, frightened but genuine smile. "A child," he said, as if testing the words. "How a child?" "Or daughter," Inez corrected, smiling too. That night, they told Beatrice, the girl was radiant. "I'm going to have a little brother," she shouted, jumping up and down. "Tristan, did you hear? I'm going to be a big sister." The cat, as always, just watched with his wise yellow eyes as if to say, "Finally." It was about time. In the following months, the palace filled with preparations, wool being knitted into tiny blankets, a cradle being refurbished in the carpentry shop, whispered conversations about names, and Raphael, who had kept his distance throughout Anna Maria's pregnancy, now stayed close, touching Inez's growing belly with a reverence and fear overcome by love, as if each gesture were a prayer that said, "This time will be different. This time we will all stay together." The months of pregnancy passed like gentle seasons. Summer brought a heat that made Inez seek the shade of the almond trees. Autumn brought golden colors that she painted in watercolors, while Beatrice did her lessons beside her. Winter arrived with the promise of snow and a baby. Raphael had transformed. The distant man from the beginning had given way to a present, sometimes overly anxious husband. He insisted that Inez rest more, eat more, walk less. She found his concern amusing, but she understood where it came from. Ghosts of the past that he was fighting to bury. In August there was an official ceremony. The Council of Nobles, now without the presence of the Countess of Alarcon, who had fallen from grace after compromising correspondence with Carlists, was discovered, officially proclaimed Inez as Duchess of Santillana, with all rights and duties. It was a day of celebration. Inez wore a formal gown adapted to her growing belly, sky blue fabric with silver embroidery, elegant but comfortable. Raphael held her hand throughout the ceremony, and when Father Sebastian blessed the union again, this time there was no doubt in his voice. Beatrice, now 8, watched from the front row, Tristan sleeping in her lap. The girl had grown, not just in height but in confidence. She played the piano with a mastery beyond her years, drew with a talent inherited from both her mothers, and awaited her little brother with an impatience that made everyone laugh. A new family portrait was commissioned, but instead of hiring a painter, Inez decided to do it herself. For weeks she worked on a large oil on canvas. Raphael seated in a formal uniform, she by his side in a blue dress with her hands on her belly, Beatrice standing between them with Tristan in her arms. She painted the background with the reborn gardens, blooming rose bushes returning life. When she finished, Raphael stood silently before the painting for long minutes. "It's perfect," he said finally. "You've captured not how we are, but how we've become." September brought a letter from Havana. Lucia had written, her handwriting firmer, her words lighter. "Dearest sister, Havana is hot and noisy and absolutely different from anything I have ever known. I teach French and music to the daughters of merchant families. It is not glamorous, but it is honest. Aunt Soledad is kind and gives me space to start over. I heard from Mother's letter about your pregnancy. Congratulations. You will be a wonderful mother. You already are. To Beatrice. May your child be born healthy and bring you all the joy you deserve. Sometimes I think about how different everything could have been if I hadn't run away. But then I realize that perhaps things happened as they were meant to. You found your place. I found mine. We are both where we needed to be. With affection, Lucia." Inez kept the letter in a wooden box where she collected memories. Beatrice's drawings, dried flowers from the gardens, the wedding ring Raphael had given her, small stories of a life being built. December arrived with intense cold. Inez had only 2 months left. Her belly was large, her movements clumsy, but she was happy, deeply, simply happy. Dr. Romero came weekly, examined her, reassured them. "Everything is fine, Duchess. The baby is in the correct position. Strong, healthy." Raphael listened to every word as if they were scripture. One December night, as it snowed outside, Inez and Raphael lay together in the large bed of the master bedroom, a room they now shared without hesitation. He placed his hand on her belly and felt the baby kick. "Strong like his father," Inez said, smiling. Or his mother, Raphael corrected. You are the strongest person I know, Inez. I don't feel strong. I feel enormous, he laughed. You are beautiful. You always have been. Inez turned on her side to face him. Are you afraid? Raphael did not lie. Yes, but I also have faith. Faith in you. Faith in us. I will be fine, she promised. We all will be. The next morning, Beatrice burst into the room still in her nightgown, Tristan in tow. The baby kicked all night, she announced, placing her hand on Inez's belly. He wants to come out. A few more weeks, Inez said, laughing. Tristan and I have already chosen a name, Beatrice continued. Oh, have you? Raphael raised an eyebrow. If it's a girl, Esperanza. If it's a boy, Miguel. Like grandfather Papa. Raphael was visibly moved. His father, Don Miguel de Santillana, had died years before but had left a profound mark. Those are perfect names, Inez said, pulling Beatrice into a hug. I couldn't have chosen better. And so, as January approached with its promise of birth and snow, the palace of Santillana filled with hope, with final preparations, with whispered prayers, and Raphael, who had not dared to pray throughout Ana Maria's pregnancy, now prayed every night beside Inez, not asking for fate to be kind, but giving thanks for having received a second chance at love, and promising himself that this time, no matter the fear, he would be present until the end. January arrived with a fury. Winter storms lashed Manzanares, winds howled between the palace towers, and the world seemed to be in suspense, waiting. Inez woke up in the middle of a thundering dawn. She felt something different. Not pain yet, but a pressure, a certainty. The baby was ready. Raphael, she called, touching his shoulder. He woke instantly, like a soldier accustomed to nocturnal alerts. Is it time? I think so. Raphael got up so quickly he nearly tripped. He lit candles, put on his robe, ran to wake Sor Dolores and send for Dr. Romero. Inez, calmer, rose. Slowly, dressing in a loose white linen nightgown. The contractions began in the early hours of the morning. They were gentle at first, waves that came and went. Inez walked around the room, held onto furniture, breathed as Dr. Romero had taught her. Beatrice appeared at the door, her eyes wide. Mama, Inez, are you okay? I am, dear, Inez assured her, though a stronger contraction made her pause for a moment. Can I stay? Inez looked at Raphael, who nodded. So you can, but it's going to be long and sometimes scary. I'm not afraid, Beatrice said, entering and sitting in a corner with Tristan. So I'm going to pray. Dr. Romero arrived at dawn, bringing his medical bag and 2 experienced midwives. He examined Inez, nodding with satisfaction. You're progressing well, but it will still be hours. A first child always takes time. The hours dragged on. Morning gave way to afternoon. The contractions intensified. Inez walked, sat, lay on her side, trying every position the midwives suggested. The pain grew like a tide that does not recede. Raphael remained by her side the entire time. This time he did not run. He held her hand when the pain tightened its grip. He wiped the sweat from her forehead. He whispered words of encouragement. You are strong. You can do this. I'm here. Around 2 in the afternoon, the pain became unbearable. Inez cried out, not in fear but in pure effort. Beatrice, who watched everything with an adult's seriousness, continued to pray quietly. It's almost time, Dr. Romero announced. One more time, Duchess. With all your strength. Inez pushed with everything she had. She felt something tear, something give way, something finally release. And then, cutting through the tense silence, a cry. A loud, angry, gloriously alive cry. It's a boy, Dr. Romero announced, holding up the baby. The newborn was quickly cleaned, wrapped in white cloths and placed in Inez's arms. She looked at the small, red, perfect, wet brown hair stuck to the tiny head. Eyes not yet fully open, but which promised to be grey-blue like his father's. Miguel, Inez whispered, tears streaming down her face. Welcome, Miguel. Raphael knelt beside the bed. He touched his son with trembling fingers, as if afraid he might disappear. But the baby was solid, real, alive. He's here, Raphael said, his voice broken with emotion. You're here. Both of you. Beatrice approached, Tristan in her arms. She looked at her little brother with an expression of wonder. He's so small, she said in awe. You were this small once too, Inez reminded her, smiling wearily. Can I hold him? Inez nodded. Beatrice sat carefully on the bed, and Inez placed Miguel in his older sister's arms. The girl looked at the baby seriously, then whispered, Hi, Miguel. I'm your sister, and this is Tristan, your cat. We're going to take care of you always. Tristan sniffed the baby, seemed to approve, and settled at the foot of the bed like a sentinel. Dr. Romero finished his work, declared mother and child healthy, and left with the midwives. Sor Dolores brought broth and tea, adjusted pillows but also left them alone. When it was finally just the four of them, Rafael, Inez, Beatriz and Miguel with Tristan included, Rafael looked around and said, "This is my family, complete, real, our family," Inez corrected. That night, while Miguel slept in his carved wooden cradle beside the bed, Rafael sat watching. He couldn't stop looking, as if he feared that if he blinked it would all disappear. Inez woke and found him still there. "Come to bed," she urged. "I'm afraid to sleep and wake up to find it was a dream," he admitted. "It's not a dream," Inez assured him, pulling him into the bed. "It's real. We are real." Rafael finally lay down, pulling her close. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me, for teaching me to hope again." "Thank you," Inez replied, "for showing me that I wasn't invisible, that I was always here, waiting to be seen." They slept like that, intertwined, while Miguel dreamed his first dreams and Tristan stood guard, and outside the storm finally subsided, giving way to a clean dawn. In the following days, the palace filled with visitors, bringing gifts and congratulations. Letters arrived from Toledo, and even one from Havana where Lucia wrote, "Now you are 3, and I know that 3 is the perfect number of multiplied love." And Beatriz took on the role of big sister, with comical seriousness, explaining to anyone who would listen that Miguel was very smart for a baby, and that Tristan had already approved of him, which meant he would be a good person when he grew up. March 1838. The spring of that year arrived with a softness that seemed hand-painted. The almond trees of the Palace of Santillana exploded in white and pale pink blossoms, petals falling like scented snow upon the gardens that Inez had spent years rebuilding. The rose bushes, once wild, now grew in organized beds but retained something of their original freedom, a disciplined beauty that had not forgotten to be true. Miguel was 4 years old. Unruly dark brown hair that refused any combing, curious grey-blue eyes that wanted to see everything, small hands always dirty with soil or paint. He was a boy who didn't walk but ran, who didn't ask once but 1,000 times, who hugged with full force and laughed with complete abandon. On that March morning, he was chasing Tristan through the palace corridors, shouting, "Kitty, wait!" Tristan, now 12 years old with the dignity of an old cat, ran with less enthusiasm but still participated in the boys' games. He stopped, let Miguel catch him, and accepted the clumsy hugs with feline patience. Beatriz, at 12, watched everything from the library window where she was studying. She had become a young woman of serene beauty, not the dramatic beauty of Lucia, nor the demure beauty of Inez, but something of her own. Light brown hair simply tied back, intelligent eyes, hands that played the piano with mastery, and drew with true talent. "Miguel, don't run in the corridors," she called out, but she was smiling. "You used to run when you were little too," Miguel retorted, his logic already sharp. "That was different." "Why?" "So because—" Beatrice searched for an argument. "So because I was more polite." "Liar!" Inez appeared in the hallway dressed simply, a moss-green dress, hair in a loose bun, no jewelry besides her wedding ring, and Anna Maria's silver cross, which she never took off. "Miguel, come. We're going to the gardens. Today we'll plant violets." Miguel instantly forgot the cat and ran to hug his mother's legs. Inez picked him up. He was still small enough for that and covered his face with kisses. "Mama, you're yummy," Miguel declared, inventing words. "Yummy?" "It's smelly plus yummy together." Inez laughed, the laugh that Rafael always said was his favorite music. The years had been kind to her. At 31, Inez was no longer the invisible daughter or the substitute. She was the Duchess of Santillana, respected in the region for her generosity and intelligence. She organized charity events, supervised schools for poor children, and maintained correspondence with thinkers and artists. But above all, she was a wife and mother, roles she filled with completeness. She found Rafael in the garden, already working the soil. He was on his knees, digging spaces for the violet seedlings. At 38, he had a few grey hairs at his temples, but he remained strong with broad shoulders and capable hands. The scar on his face had faded over the years, but was still there, a reminder of other lives. "Papa!" shouted Miguel, jumping from Inez's arms and running to his father. Rafael dropped the trowel and opened his arms. Miguel threw himself into them, was lifted into the air, and spun around until he laughed so loudly that birds took flight from the trees. "My little farmer," Rafael said, setting him down. "Ready to plant?" "Yes. Violets are Grandma Anna's favorite, right?" "They were," Rafael corrected, but without sadness. He had learned to speak of Anna Maria with love, not pain. "And they are also Aunt Lucia's favorite, who lives in Cuba." "That's right." Inez knelt beside them. Together, the three of them planted the seedlings, Rafael digging, Miguel placing the plants in the holes with exaggerated care, Inez covering them with soil and watering them. Beatrice joined them later, bringing more seedlings. Tristan watched from a distance, lying in the sun like a king supervising his subjects. It was while they were working that Raphael said, "I received a letter today. From the Countess of Alarcon." Inez looked up, surprised. They hadn't heard from her in years. "She is ill. Asking for forgiveness," Raphael continued. "She says she spent years carrying bitterness, and now near the end wants to depart in peace. Are you going to answer?" Inez asked. "I already have. I told her that forgiveness was given long ago. That I hope she finds the peace she seeks." Inez took his hand, soil clinging between their intertwined fingers. "You have become a good man. I became the man you believed I could be," Raphael corrected. They finished planting. They cleaned their hands in a basin of water. They sat on the stone bench under the almond tree, the same one where Raphael had told her about Anna Maria years before. Miguel and Beatriz were playing with Tristan, who had finally given in and was rolling on the grass, belly up, while the boy tickled him. "So you fixed the music box," Raphael observed, looking at Inez. She nodded. It had taken almost a year, but with patience and the help of a watchmaker from Toledo, she had managed to get the mechanism working again. Now the box played every night for Miguel to fall asleep to. The same melody Anna Maria had played for Beatriz. "It wasn't about erasing the past," Inez said. "It was about honoring it. Anna Maria deserves to be remembered. Her music deserves to continue." Raphael pulled her closer, kissed her hair. "How is Lucia?" The last letter said she is happy. She's gained a little weight, which she says is a sign of contentment. She has a suitor, a kind-hearted Portuguese merchant, according to her. He deals in coffee and spices. Lucia says she likes his calmness, how he doesn't expect her to be extraordinary just herself. Raphael smiled. "It seems both Valverde sisters found what they were looking for, or what we didn't know we were looking for," Inez corrected. They sat in silence, watching the children. Beatriz was now teaching Miguel how to make a flower crown from the fallen almond blossoms. The boy tried to imitate her, but his small hands made everything twist and fall apart. He laughed at each failure, trying again without frustration. "He has your resilience," Raphael observed. "And your stubbornness," Inez added, smiling. It was then that Miguel ran to them, holding something in his cupped hands. "Mama, Papa, look!" He carefully opened his hands. A white butterfly rested on his palm. "It landed on me." Beatrice said it's a gift from heaven. Inez felt her chest tighten. Butterflies, symbols of transformation, of beauty born from change. "It is, my love," she said, gently touching the butterfly's wing. "It's nature's way of saying you are special." "Can I keep it?" "No," Raphael replied, kneeling beside his son. "Butterflies need to fly. They aren't meant to be caged. But if you set it free, it will always remember you. And maybe it will come back another day." Miguel considered this, then raised his hands to the sky and blew gently. The butterfly opened its wings and flew, rising, until it disappeared among the almond blossoms. "Bye-bye, butterfly. Come back whenever you want," Miguel shouted, waving. That night, after Miguel and Beatriz were asleep, the boy with Tristan at the foot of his bed, the girl with a book still open on her chest, Inez and Raphael walked through the palace corridors. They passed the library where she had first found the piano, Anna Maria's room, which was now a space of honored memories, not locked-away pain, the gardens illuminated only by the moon. "Do you remember the day you arrived here?" Raphael asked. "How could I forget? I was wearing Lucia's dress, with her initials embroidered on it. I felt like I was occupying a place that wasn't mine. And now?" Inez stopped, looked at the palace stretching out behind them, at the gardens she had brought back to life, at the lit windows that held her family. "Now I know there is no such thing as someone's place. There are empty spaces waiting for those with the courage to fill them with truth." She turned to Raphael. "I didn't take Lucia's place. I created my own, and it is exactly where I am supposed to be." Raphael pulled her into a hug. "Do you know what I admire most about you?" "What?" "You didn't wait for the world to see you. You simply started living so authentically that it became impossible to ignore you." They went back inside. They climbed the grand staircase, the same one Inez had descended on her wedding day, feeling like an imposter. Now every step was familiar. Every portrait on the walls included her face. Every corner held her memories. In the bedroom, the large bedroom that was now theirs, not his or hers, but theirs, Inez went to the window. Anna Maria's music box was on the nightstand, next to a drawing Miguel had made. A house with 4 people and a cat, all with disproportionately large suns smiling over their heads. Raphael hugged her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice low. Inez thought about the question. She thought about the invisible girl she had been, the substitute bride she had become, the duchess she had earned, the mother and wife she now was. "Yes," she answered, and it was the simplest, most complete truth she had ever spoken. "I am happy, not because everything was easy, but because every hardship showed me who I really was, and who I have become. I like this person." They lay down together as they did every night, bodies intertwined, breaths in sync, silences comfortable. Before falling asleep, Inez whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For accepting the substitution that day, for giving me the chance to prove, not to you but to myself, that I wasn't invisible. I just wasn't in the right place to be seen." Raphael kissed her forehead. "Destiny is funny, isn't it? Sometimes the things that seem like losses are actually disguised gains. Lucia lost a duke, but gained the freedom to choose. I lost my invisibility, but gained a life. And I," said Raphael, his voice thick with emotion, "I lost the first wife I loved, but I gained the chance to learn that the human heart has no limits. That loving again doesn't betray those we loved before. It just proves that love transformed us into people capable of continuing to love." They slept like that, secure in the knowledge that they had built something true. The years would continue, of course. Miguel would grow up to be a questioning and kind young man. Beatriz would eventually marry a music teacher from Madrid, have her own children, but always return to the palace, to the library piano, to the gardens where she grew up. Tristan would live to be 18, surrounded by love, and when he passed, he would be buried under the century-old almond tree with a small headstone that read, "Only, faithful guardian." Lucia would marry in Havana, have a simple but genuine life and never stop writing to Inez. The letters would become bridges between two worlds, two choices, two ways of being happy. Raphael and Inez would grow old together, white hair, wrinkled hands, but gazes that would never lose the shine of having chosen each other every single day. But on that March night in 1838, as spring blossomed and the gardens sang with promises, none of that mattered. Only the present mattered. Miguel dreaming of butterflies, Beatriz of her books, Tristan on his eternal watch, Raphael and Inez intertwined. And somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, Inez thought, I was the invisible daughter, the second choice, the substitute. But I discovered that to be forgotten by the world can be the greatest freedom, because when no one expects anything of you, you have the courage to become everything you always were. The last thing she saw before falling asleep was the moon through the window, round and perfect, illuminating the gardens she had brought back to life. And she knew with absolute certainty that her story, this story that had begun with an escape and a substitution, was not about losses or gains. It was about transformations. It was about discovering that invisibility can be a chrysalis, not a prison. It was about learning that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't to shout to be seen, but to simply start living so truly that the world has no choice but to pay attention. It was about a love that does not replace but adds, and about gardens that, even when abandoned, never stop wanting to bloom. Doña Elvira Valverde died 2 years earlier, during a typhoid epidemic that ravaged Toledo. She left everything to Inez in her will, a surprise that came with a posthumous letter. Dearest Inez, I always considered you the weaker of my daughters. Forgive me, I was wrong. Strength is not making noise. It is remaining. Thank you for teaching me that, even without knowing it. Your mother, who finally sees you. The Countess of Alarcon died in peace after receiving Raphael's forgiveness. It was discovered after her death that she kept in her room one of Inez's drawings, a watercolor of the gardens of Santillana. Perhaps in the end, even envy can turn into admiration. The Carlist War finally ended, bringing a fragile but real peace to Spain. The Palace of Santillana remained as a silent witness that not all battles are fought with weapons. Some are won with patience, resilience, and the refusal to disappear. And so, as the stars wheeled over Castile, as the seasons succeeded one another, and life continued its eternal blossoming, the story of Inez Valverde, the Duchess no one expected, the woman who was invisible until she decided to be seen, remained as proof that redemption comes not from grand gestures, but from small daily choices to be true, to love with courage, and to transform even the most abandoned gardens into havens of beauty. Because in the end, we are all a bit like those gardens, forgotten for periods, neglected, wild, but always capable of blooming again. It just takes someone, even if that someone is ourselves, to believe we are worth tending to. And there in the Palace of Santillana, under the starry sky of March 1838, a family slept in peace. Not a perfect family, but a true one, built not by blood or obligation, but by choices, patience, and the courage to believe that love, true love, replaces no one. It only adds. It always